But one unique thing about Lake Erie and all the Great Lakes is you can always find your own little piece of the world. We've got a huge bass population of bass anglers, professional and non-professional, whole bunch of big, fast, glittery boats like mine running around, just like the Salt. But I can always find my own little piece of the world during the course of the day that we can call our own if we want to just get away. So it's actually pretty unique. And I can play the game. I can go deep, I can go shallow. It's changing though, and I'm sure your saltwater game's changing too. The fish are going a little more pelagic. They're not getting structure oriented as used to be, but I'm still playing the game the old way and learning the new game too.
This is the Tom Rowland Podcast. Fascinating stories to amaze, encourage, and inspire you in fishing, fitness, and the outdoors. And we're brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. I started this podcast as a way to connect with my friends, people that I admire and respect, and you. It has been a learning journey that's made me a better person, a better fisherman, a better father, and a better athlete. I'm so happy that you're on this journey with me, and I'd love to hear from you with show suggestions, guest suggestions, or questions. The best way to get a hold of me is through text. You can text 305-930-7346 for the fastest response, but if you prefer to email, you can send that to podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That's a dedicated email address just for the show. If you like this show, you can show your support by posting about it on social media and tagging me. Text the link to a couple of friends that may also enjoy it, and subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you feel like I've earned it. The website is tomrowlandpodcast.com, and that is where everything lives. All past shows, you can go and listen to any show. You can look up all the different shows that we've done, both the How To Tuesdays, the full links, and the physical Fridays. They all live on tomrowlandpodcast.com. And the social media is Tom_Rowland, ROWLAND, on Instagram, or you can go to our big account, Saltwater_Experience. I hope to hear from you soon. So now, let's get on to today's show.
Hey, this is Jeff Liske, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
All right, Jeff, man, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Tom. Thanks for the invite, man.
You're welcome. You got a really good introduction. April Vokey said you're the best fisherman that she knows. That's pretty high praise.
Yeah, I don't think that's the truth, but yeah, April's a wonderful gal, and we've had some time to spend together. So,
well, you must have done something to impress her. So, where you're fishing, it's interesting. That is one part of the country, and not that I've been to every part of the country and fished in all parts of the country, but certainly in some parts way more than others. But the Great Lakes, that is a great mystery to me. I have never fished there. I know that the fishing can be amazing for smallmouth bass and the steelhead and everything. Tell me what your program is up there.
Yeah, sure. First off, you're gonna have to come up and sample it first.
I know,
right?
I know. And now, see, with you up there, now I have two reasons to come, because my friend Derek DeYoung, the artist, he goes up there, and he's mentioned it a couple times, and he sent me some videos of these smallmouth bass that he's catching up there. It just looks amazing, and I'm almost embarrassed that I haven't been there. I mean, I just, there's only so much time, I guess, but that's just a part of the country that I just have not fished in, and I really want to. So I'll take you up on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the salt, Tom, but I will say it's like the inland oceans. And I've been doing it now for 40 plus years, and there's places that I haven't been. Mm-hmm. We've got the 5 Great Lakes, plus we've got Lake St. Clair, which might as well call it the 6th Great Lakes. But however you want to play the game. So I started out just first netting walleyes and smallmouth, and eventually switched over to the fly. And I still do a lot of light conventional gear fishing, but however you want to play the game. If you want to go up and fish backcountry, sight fish into bowfin and drum and smallmouth, in 18 inches of water on the flats, you can do that. You can go out in the deep and troll, however you want to play the game. But I live on the most fertile one of all. I live on the south shores of Lake Erie.
Okay.
And it's, we've got this huge population of walleyes. We've got the migratory trout that are stocked. They're not wild. There's a few wild that run up in the Canadian rivers, but between the tributaries that are within, say, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan and Wisconsin, that's sort of my realm. And I do get up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, explore around, but the main lakes that I stay on are Erie and then St. Clair.
Now, what do you think makes your area where you are the most fertile?
Well, number one, it's very shallow. So Lake Erie is not as shallow as St. Clair, but it's very shallow. There's only two places that are semi-deep in relationship to depth. So the one is right off of Cleveland, Ohio. It's around 80 foot deep. And then off of Long Point, Canada, Erie, Pennsylvania is the deepest. It's only 210. So it has this prolific, we got some areas for lake trout to live and some of the cold water species in the summer, but then it's just a natural breeding ground for all warm water species that are around. So it's pretty unique.
Yeah. And what's the fishing pressure like in your area?
It's like every place else with good fishing, Tom. It's highly pressured, right? Yeah, it's highly pressured, especially for the walleyes.
Yeah. You've got a couple of population, centers nearby. I would imagine that you got a lot of boats up there.
We do. And I will go on record. I'm sure you experience it too. COVID and flex schedule has even added to that even more so. Mm-hmm. But one unique thing about Lake Erie and all the Great Lakes is you can always find your own little piece of the world. We've got a huge bass population of bass anglers, professional and non-professional, whole bunch of big, fast, glittery boats like mine running around, just like the Salt. But I can always find my own little piece of the world during the course of the day that we can call our own if we want to just get away. So it's actually pretty unique. Mm-hmm. And I can play the game. I can go deep. I can go shallow. It's changing though, and I'm sure your saltwater game's changing too. The fish are going a little more pelagic. They're not getting structure oriented as used to be, but I'm still playing the game the old way and learning the new game too.
That's interesting. So how does your year shake out? You got some cold weather up there. What's your fishing year look like?
Okay. So right now we have a fall starting around Halloween all the way through the winter into around Mother's Day in May. We have the migratory rainbows that run up, the Ohio streams, the Pennsylvania streams in New York. So, I'm guiding on that, but the boat is not put away yet. So we've got these milder temperatures, climate change, whatever you call it. Lake Erie still running 42 degrees now. So we're getting the big trophy walleye. You can cast for them with crankbaits, flies, trolling's more successful. We can strip streamers off the river mouse for the steelhead still. It's open. I just got done muskie fishing up on St. Clair. We had to break some ice out in the morning and a little shelf ice along the shorelines, but, we're still using the big boats. And then once spring comes, though, it's open game for anything that swims, of course, because everything gets shallow, as far as like spawning. I stay away from the spawners. I don't fish for the spawning smallmouth or nothing, but I fish the fringes because there's always Mother Nature protecting them a little bit. So usually my game is I'll start the lake fishing around April once I get off the rivers. And then I continue all the way through midsummer into August. And then September is my tricky month. I can catch pretty much everything if you got some skill set with a fly rod during the summer. But September, we get a little bit of a water cooling. And before the lake turns over or the lakes turn over, I get a little bit of I struggle sometimes to catch fish in September. But then things fire right back up October, November, and right where I'm back now. But September is people want to go fishing because it's beautiful, but sometimes I struggle, to get things going in September.
Yeah, it looked like you had spent some time in Alaska. Also, is that a time where you go up to Alaska, or maybe you'll do some traveling in that September timeframe if that's a tough month?
Yeah, September is Jeff's month because as a fishing guide, as you know, I never fish. I think I pick up the rod like twice a year. But September is that's how I met April and I hung out. I'll just do a whole month up in BC. We do Alaska. We might do some Atlantic salmon. But that, now I'll go up to, say, the Nipigon River way up north on the Lake Superior, and we start looking for host places. We look for some pretty cool places to chase some fish that our fishery is sort of slow. That's all.
Yeah. And so what, in Jeff's month, what kind of adventures have you found? I mean, all of the ones in BC that you just mentioned, that sounds pretty amazing, but, have you explored Alaska pretty extensively, or where are you in that?
No, I love to say I explored Alaska a lot, but I have not. I stay on the same lodge, the same river. I basically use the Bristol Bay area. I use the Neck River. And we usually swing flies for those big trophy rainbows. After they get done feeding on the sockeye eggs, they go on the big flesh bite and basically there's a lamprey that's on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because it's just a huge trophy rainbow, and they hit the swung fly pretty well. And that's been my go-to for there. I can't tell you how much of a great fishery that is.
That's interesting, swinging the flies for them, because so much of the rainbow fishing that I hear about in Alaska, and that the little bit that I've done myself, is the egg fishing. Which can be incredibly productive, and you can catch some really big ones. But the swinging the flies, that's a little different. Are you swinging flesh flies? Or are you swinging other flies? What does it look like where you're doing it?
Yep. So the go-to pattern for me has been a standard dark chocolate or black rabbit strip leech around 4.5 inches. There's a small little lamprey that scoots along the bottom. And I'm not saying you can't catch them on. Yes. And that's where all the 30-inch plus fish we've caught have came off of that pattern. Huh. And we do fish flesh. Like if you get later in the season and you start to see the flesh, hanging up on the trees, and I probably would never pull out of a run without fishing flesh if we didn't get a grab. So we usually have the controlled fly on, like the dark leech, and then we'll have somebody else run a flesh before we pull out of that run.
Right.
Just to make sure, cover all of our bases.
Mm-hmm. So when you're catching one that rabbit strip fly, are there a lot of fish in the river that are dropping eggs and that have, I mean, like you say, you'll try flesh right before you leave and everything, but when you're getting those bites on that, are fish dropping eggs and stuff?
No. So the bite that you're experiencing is the sockeye egg bite by the millions.
Yeah.
And those fish will just get in behind the big giant gravel bars where they're spawning, and you can't swing for them because they're just gobbling eggs.
Right.
But there's about a window, about a week after that happens, and the egg conveyor belt stops. That's when those fish go on the hunt.
Right.
And the later you can push the season, the better off you can get, right into November if it doesn't, get too nasty. But so that bite is, I'd say, starting around the second week of September is when the sockeyes really start to slow down in spawning. This year was the last week of September, but give or take that window is the best I've had to say is October, first week of October, to do the big leech bite.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So on these on the trip, September is kind of my month too, because it's a good hunting month. I go out west and hunt with my boys and do some. I'm kind of a newbie on the elk hunting and the archery, but it's very addictive, just like fly fishing. The elk hunting and the archery. It's very cool. I really like it. But are there some other places on your list that you want to go? Are you looking? Do you just kind of gravitate towards that area, or you want to go to the warm water, or what do you want? What would you do in September if you had the choice?
So there's areas that on the Great Lakes that I can explore in September when Jeff goes fishing, to open up more adventures. So the water temperature is changing. So like the eastern end of Lake Erie, the fish are starting to gather back up over the Pennsylvania side. But I will say that I am obsessed with figuring out the suspended smallmouth game. It's just something that gravitates to me because it's not easy with the fly angler.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can get up on I get on the forward view sonar now, and I can chase them down in 40 foot of water. I mark bait and I can mark the fish and I'm chasing them down, but it's not that easy with the fly rod.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to so a lot of times, Tom, it's that vertical speed drop of the lure, and I can't mimic that with a fly.
Yeah.
I'm trying, but I mean, so now I'm working through that. So that's been my main focus, is working on my home waters and really fine tuning the way these fish are adjusting to their new ecosystem. Right.
Mm-hmm. So like when spin anglers, conventional anglers are targeting those fish, what's the most effective way? Like drop shotting, or what do you do on those suspended?
So they're probably, most of the time they're throwing like 3/4 ounce paddle tails, and then they can count it down. A lot of times we're fishing, say, even if we're fishing 20 some foot of water, we can count it down 6, 8, 10, and then just slow roll them in.
Right.
If the water's a little warmer, we'll snap jig them in. But that's usually the go-to. Now, if you can get them structure oriented, there's two types of fishing. One is going to be like that roly-poly structure where the fish are just out roaming on the little roly-polies in the deeper water, and looking for pods of bait fish and gobies or whatever. That's the drop shot bite. Mm-hmm. But then once you get a pile of bait and you get those fish up off the bottom, it's a whole nother world of what you could do. Fast and furious action.
Sure. And then you're trying to mimic what is being very successful with a spinning rod, with a fly rod. So how are you, like, what kind of depth are you needing to get to with a fly rod?
I can get to 30 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem with a sinking line, I'm using around a 25-foot tungsten sinking shooting head, mm-hmm. Is that you have to have distance for that to work.
Right.
So, you have to be a fairly skilled angler, just like saltwater fishing with tarp and everything else. It's not even an accuracy. It's about, I could say, if you could crush the 70 feet all day, that gives that line time to get down. Mm-hmm. And it's like everything else. It's, you got that piece of pizza pie where you're throwing, and it might take me 2/3 of that window to get it down. And they only have a 1/3 to get it stripped in that window, where a gear, I can pretty much get it down a quarter of the way through my cast to get it down and start ripping it through. So right. I'm manipulating that a little bit, but the vertical speed drop has been really a struggle, because to get the fastest vertical speed drop, it's usually a floating line, super heavy fly. So I've just been using the same tungsten shooting heads, but I'm running super long leaders, 12-footers with super heavy flies. And that's been working for the muskie, the walleyes, and the smallmouth to get that reaction bite that I wasn't be able to get with your standard neutral buoyancy, walk the dog type, fly.
Right. Now tell me about the muskie, and how you're, like, are you able to fish for those? I mean, when you decide that you're in good, productive muskie water and you want, that might be a good shot, are you putting wire on, or are you or going without wire?
Yeah, no, it's a wire game. Mm-hmm. It's about a 4 to 5 foot leader. You need about at least 10 inches or 12 inches of bite wire, your choice, whatever you want. The secret is that, we usually run 40 or 50 pound mono to, say, a bite section, mm-hmm. with a swivel. Nothing different than we would do with a gear rod. The difference is that with that fly rod, when we come towards the boat to do the figure eight or the boat side maneuver, we want to be able to strip that leader right to the wire, mm-hmm. and have that fly within a foot or two of the rod tip, so we can move that fly like you could a lure. So we usually put a little bit of like aqua seal or something on that knot, or I usually put a piece of basically shrink tubing where the leader and the fly line meet, so I can strip it really fast in, and I don't get that connection knock.
Yeah.
And then I make my boat side maneuver and then continue casting. But, there's May and June, our season opens up June 1 on Lake St. Clair, and the fishing is within our realm. But then all summer long, majority of the best muskie fishing is over on the Canadian side of Lake St. Clair. And we're fishing around 18 feet to 21 feet, but the fish are suspended. A lot of times the weeds are up to the surface, but it's a distance thing there too. It's a pretty long cast with some pretty long days to get them to go.
Mm-hmm. Some of the people that I know that fish for muskie a lot are using the advancements in, like, the Lowrance active target and the forward facing sonar, which you mentioned that you have, but you also said that there are a lot of weeds there. So are you able to use that for the muskies in those places when they're suspended, or are the weeds interfering?
No. So there's one big predominant weed bed that's over on the Canadian side. It's really large. And then there's some sporadic weeds that come up off the bottom. And the interesting thing is that usually when you're marking them on the sonar, it took me a while to figure out that the ones that are a little bit closer to the tops of the weeds are the giant channel catfish.
Uh-huh.
And then the muskies are usually above them.
Above them?
Yeah, above them. And you got to have bait. So usually it's like any other big, predator. You got to have bait nearby. There's a lot of big, large boats that troll for muskies with multi-lines. And the cool thing about it is they have to troll the edges because they don't want to be getting, 10, 12 lines into those weeds. So we, the gear guys that are throwing gear, the fly guys, there's only a handful of us, a couple, 2, 3 throwing flies. We concentrate in areas that, the trollers can't quite get into also. So it gives us a little advantage. But mainly it's just, can you get the distance? Can you keep that fly in the water? And then there I noticed it's even there, it's a vertical speed drop. Have you ever heard they throw that big giant pounder, the rubber and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Have you heard those lures?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine our flies are that big, but we can't get it to drop super, super fast.
Right.
So it's a strip. It's a pretty a upward motion strip. And then I've been playing around adding egg sinkers, pegging egg sinkers right up in the front of my fly. So if I get a follow or something, I'll just do like a running line egg sinker trick and I'll just huck it out there and then I'll do the strip rip and it just plunges really quickly. And a lot of times you can get a grab on that too.
Huh.
It's a learning process.
Yeah.
Learning process.
Well, I guess so. And over the time that you've been doing this, how much has, when you look back on what you were doing quite a few years ago with the fly rod, how much has that changed to today?
Tons.
I mean, you got so many advances, like rod technology's gotten better, the reel technology, but the lines, like all these different sinking lines that you're talking about, that's a major advancement over what we had to fish with not even that long ago. So do you see it as like something that you're on the beginning of a kind of pioneer kind of thing with, learning how to use the forward-facing sonar and learning how to use the new heavier sinking lines and tying new flies and stuff? Is this like a frontier for those type of fish, or are we kind of maxed out with what you can do with the fly rod?
I don't think we're maxed out, and I'm by no means a frontier of this fishery at all. There's another Eric Liske. He is pretty much full-time muskie fly guy up there with a lot of gear conventional. And then Brian Mazzaros, who I bought my company from, he was one of the founders of sort of chasing them on the fly up there. But they were sort of using the same lines, but I think now the sonar technology, and I got this driving, burning sensation when I go fishing, is just to keep on the cutting edge of always trying to I could do way better than I'm doing. And that's where I think these new lines are working. So it's interesting. It's a payload delivery system, right? With these new lines, you got an 11, 12, 14-inch fly that it's not so much weight, but it's wind resistance. Mm-hmm. And then you got a grain weight of a fly line, say 500, 550 grains. It's not quite a really big payload to deliver that big payload system. So the tricky part is to get the shooting line, a thin part behind that head. If you get it too thin, it tangles a lot. Mm-hmm. When you get temperature problems, just like you guys have the cores when it's warmer for salt. Well, right. I sort of have to have the two cores with me, because in the mornings, I want the cold core, and then as things get burning hot or the rod lays on the deck, I'll go to a jungle tropical core, because now my lines are up close to 90 degrees, burning up in the sun time in the summertime. So I sort of carry the same line, but in two core different temperatures. And I'm using all SA products. So it's pretty unique to work with them and say, hey, this works, but let's try this. So that's sort of how I'm going through that.
And the material that's inside of that, is it a solid core or a braided core?
The braided core would be the warmer, mm-hmm. and then the solid core would be the colder. And the cool thing about braided cores is that you get about 30% more strength is when the fly line, if you can just use its, layman's term, the fly line goop gets incorporated with that braided Chinese finger core, and it gets super strong. Mm. So it's way stronger. Like when you guys are using your 50-pound cores, it's probably testing out at 70 pounds for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Saltwater type.
Yeah, that was a big problem not that long ago. When people were starting to fish for the arapaima and stuff, all the lines were breaking. So the lines have gotten a lot stronger when necessary. Not all lines have, but that's interesting. So and what else do you? The muskie is of interest. I like how that's a fish that I don't have a lot of experience with, but I just caught my first one the other day, and we were bait fishing, but it was really cool, and I love the muskie. I think it's just like, I don't know, it's right up my alley. It's like a predator fish. I love the barracuda. I love the sharks. I love wahoo and fish that just eat other things. I think it's super cool, and the muskie is like that in freshwater, and they're also huge. Uh-oh, got a visitor?
Can you? I'm just going to jump away.
Sure.
I got a 20-inch Garmin that's just sitting here to get signed for.
Oh, yeah, do that. Christmas time.
What was the chance of a 20-inch Garmin coming right when you were doing the podcast?
Yeah, so what do you intend to do with that?
Add more play toys on the boat.
Do you have room for more?
I'll keep stacking them, right?
Where will that go? I mean, like, how do you have your boat set up? That's an interesting kind of idea, because I'm sure you have a dash mounted, some sort of dash mounted electronics, and then probably up by the trolling motor, like a typical bass fishermen do. But then the walleye fishermen have additional ones back by the big motor a lot of times. So how do you have yours set up with the electronics with fly fishing? Because they're not, so they're kind of fly line magnets depending on how they're mounted.
They are. So and I can take them on and off is a cool thing. So I do believe there's a huge difference between Garmin's technology when it comes down to forward facing sonar. But I do have Humminbird up on the front because I can link it in with my Minn Kota. So the Humminbird up front is linked into my Minn Kota that has 360 on it, and then side view scanning. And then I have two Humminbirds on the dash, one for GPS, one for just the depth. And then I have one on the stern back in the boat by the motor for trolling. So the one of the Humminbirds now that's on the dash is going away. I'm going to put the Garmin on, and then I'm going to use the over the side where I can drop the basically forward facing off the side, off the track, off for like fishing for muskie, or bring it up front. I have a track mount on the front, so I can move. I'll be able to move the forward facing. Because a lot of times I'm fishing downwind, and I think it's pretty important to get your fly or the bait to the fish before the boat does.
Right.
And I think that's pretty important. And I'm not pulling downwind like a saltwater where we got them like super stealthy, right? So I can't kick the electric on. And I'm not using power poles. I mean, I probably should, but that's another fly rod magnet, right? So my go-to will be I usually just idle into the wind, and I stay on the bow. It's interesting because most dominant fly casters are right-handed, and I usually put them in the back corner of the boat. There's very little to catch with the fly line, and then I can run all the big electronics up front, and then I can just, basically touch screen. If I see something cool, I'll just go bump over there. If it's not, I'll swing the live scope over, say, hey, there are fish, they're moving towards the fly or whatever. So I'm usually on the bow, and then I adjust the speed according to the species. So like muskies, you want to keep the boat moving around 0.75, 3/4 miles an hour, cover water. Smallmouth, I could speed it up if I'm power fishing, but that's generally right around a 0.5 mile an hour or so, maybe 0.6. That if I'm fishing for drum or I'm fishing for some little more lethargic fish, I'm going to drop it down to like 0.4, try to keep that little bit of a pace going with the motor.
Right. And so those paces that you just described, those are like when you're predominantly fly fishing. That's the kind of pace that you're liking to cover water with.
I do. It gives the angler an opportunity to get the fly down. Right. So the problem with the fly versus the gear is that there's, you're using the cadence of the angler, the stripping. So I got to have a little window for me to be able, like when he pauses it, I noticed that if I just spot lock on them, I do not do as well because when they pause it, they come up and say, hey, that's chicken feathers, right? A lot of times. But if I get the boat moving just a little bit, and when they make that pause, that fly still has a little bit of movement. And I feel like I'd third better when the boat's always moving.
Yeah. Now, how would those paces change if you had two experienced, very good, spin casters on the boat that were, really good? Say they were pro bass guys. How would your pace change compared to the fly?
Substantially faster. So if I had gear guys, it's like, hey, we're power fishing the top of the flats, so let's just look at, so like August, we're throwing square bills, just pounding shallows, looking for those dominant onesie, twosie fish up on the flat for those 4, 5, 6 pound smallmouth, just crushing it, where the fly, I probably would have to slow down enough because otherwise you probably couldn't stay in the zone long enough. And I do go fast with the fly rod too. But I think I would pick the pace up at least, 2 clicks or so just with the gear guy, because I know they can handle it.
Right.
Angle of attack, right, Tom?
Right. Yeah, and they can get it in so much fast. I mean, once you throw 70 feet of line out there and you're letting it sink in some situations, you're kind of committed for a little bit. Like, it's going to take a while for you to get, back in enough to make a second cast, where with a spinning rod, 6.2 to 1 retrieve ratio or whatever, you're just like zipping that thing back in and you're right back out there again. So you can move quite a bit faster. I think it's kind of interesting because we do a lot in the Florida Keys. We do a lot of, fly fishing, do a lot of spin fishing, do a lot of bait fishing, do a lot of different kinds of fishing. And there's some guys that really want to be, all fly. There's other guys that feel like they want to be everything. Like there's certain times of the year for each thing. And if fly fishing is not productive, they'd rather be doing other things. And typically those are the guys that win most of the tournaments. But I was just kind of interested. It's interesting to talk to you about it because just the Great Lakes has both, right? You fly fish, you spin fish, and you're fishing with lures. If you were to have is there a big drop off? Like if somebody comes to you and they say, despite the time of I'm sure the time of the year makes a big difference, but say the fishing's really good and they say they want to fly fish, and would if you took, gear guys out on the same kind of conditions and the same kind of days, would they typically catch a lot more? Or can the fly guys, are there certain situations where you can do every bit as well, if not better, on the fly?
That's a great question. If you would put him on the same skill set level, I think that there are times the fly has an advantage because just look about a bass tournament guy. When you're going down the bank, you're not the only guy going down the bank, right? So we're throwing something that they haven't seen before. So a lot of times, during the peak of the season, I might see 30, 40, 50 bass boats, and I'm looking around and they're all drop shot and doing their thing and catching a few fish, and I'll come in behind them and just start making some really good, successful catches. But in general, I would have to still say the spin angler is going to have a little more advantage. But I have 4, 5, 6 rods rigged up with fly rods, so I can almost mimic everything a gear guy can. I can throw a popper. I can go to intermediate line. I can walk the dog. I can jig it now. I can put on a super heavy fly. So if their casting skill set's good, I'm gonna say not quite as good, but I'd highly encourage somebody to try it. It's pretty cool when you get a gear fly guy, like maybe both me and you went. We would go through there and say, hey, let's just make a pass up through here, get them located, get a few icons dropped down, get a few icons dropped, and then we'll come back, let's go back with the fly, see what we can do. And they're like, wow, okay, look at this, right?
Yeah. I mean, that seems
cool.
like the most productive way. Like when I grew up in Tennessee bass fishing and I wanted to catch them on fly, that's kind of what I did. I kind of, didn't have the electronics that we have today, and certainly didn't have them on my little John boat. But, you could go and make a few casts and you get a couple bites and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to try to mimic this same lure, and that's what I did at first. I was like, I wasn't even really fishing for the fish as much as I was like, okay, I know people catch them on this type of lure. So what would a fly look like how can I make a fly look like that kind of lure? And sure enough, you catch them because they'd already done the work for you. They know what the fish are biting and what works. And then later, as I got a little better at it, then I was like, well, maybe I don't know why they're eating this thing that doesn't look like anything that's in this lake. But I do know what does live in this lake. There are hellgrammites and there's all kinds of nymphs and there's, all these different small fish, and I could make it look like that. And then you'd have some success kind of doing what you do in trout fishing. Like you'd try to make it look like what they're eating. And, bass are curious creatures. They eat a lot of different things, and maybe they look like stuff that lives in there. I don't know, but some bass lures are pretty crazy looking. So, I don't know if I necessarily have a question about that, but I'm sure that as you're, sometimes you're imitating lures, and then other times you're thinking, well, I think the fish are really eating this particular type of bait, or they're really, doing this. How much do you go back and forth on those kind of things when you're targeting them on fly?
Yeah, it's fly rod research when I conventional gear fish.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, I'm always using conventional gear to locate active fish, right? It's just easier to catch active fish rather than it's like static fish. So what I'll do is even like drop shotting. What I'll do is I'll put a super heavy jig fly on, and then I'll come on up around 18 inches or so, and then I'll put on another fly. And I think one of the drawbacks is that, let's just say, like you said, hellgrammite or whatever, there's only two ways to go, right? Creepy crawler slow on the bottom, or let's get after it, burn it in, bait fish, get the reaction bite. Mm-hmm. And if those bass or those fish ain't coming up off the bottom, a lot of fly anglers have a tendency to do like, oh, I'm a trout streamer guy, always like going like 100 miles an hour. Well, their success is going to be pretty slow. You got to just really slow it down and just creepy crawler that fly, almost like hand walk it in, but give those fish time to wagon train around it, take a look at it, pause it, jiggle it like, a shaky head, almost bait fish it. And then that might be the canvas for the day. You might say, okay, that's what's doing it. And there's other times though, when they're up and moving, then it's a different story, right? Mm-hmm. But I do say the belly color. I don't know if you notice it, Tom, at all, is that if I'm fishing a fly or a crankbait or something, I really don't need to know a whole lot other than, is it an orange belly, a white belly, chartreuse belly? What are the fish seeing from underneath when I'm crushing that fly through there? So I'm using all that experience from my crankbait colors, and I usually use what's on the bottom. That's all I care about.
Yeah, that's interesting. We talked a lot about different innovations, particularly electronics, but you have all kinds of innovations. And in the type of fishing that you're doing, it seems very gear intensive. Like compared to a Spring Creek trout fishing. I mean, you're trying to get it down deep. You're using all different types of tackle, both spin tackle and gear tackle, as well as fly. What do you think, if somebody were to say, what do you think is the innovation that's happened in the last, 20 years that has changed your fishing more than anything else? What would you say that it was?
I would say three things. One is going to be synthetic materials for fly tying.
Yeah.
They shed the water very quickly when you cast.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the flash, everybody's used to like the flashy boo. But I would say now these new body flashes that gives it that subtle flash, mm-hmm. rather than like in your face flash, those things have really helped out a lot in mine. The durability of fly lines and the tapers that allows a guy to give an average fly caster the advantage for the day. I think that's just huge, because we struggled before with these advancements with 60-foot heads. Got to be a pretty darn good caster. And we keep shortening that ratio up, right? 25 foot, right? 30 foot max now. So I think that's my number two. And then, of course, not that you have all these electronics that make them bite. That's the thing. It's like a TV screen that makes them bite. But I think it's pretty cool when you can see the disposition of a fish like if I come to a piece of structure, we got suspended fish on it, I normally would see the fish suspended and we would have to fish for them, but I never knew if they were moving for my bait or not. So now I can actually say, hey, they're starting to move for it, or these fish aren't even moving. Let's move on.
Yeah.
So it gives me that disposition of the fish, like, let's surgically remove these guys, or we got to pull, we got to go now.
Yeah.
Type deal. But I think those are the three big ones.
Yeah. That, we're using the Lowrance Active Target, which is the brand that we use, and we're learning how to use it better and better and better. And with the tarpon, it's pretty easy to use because the tarpon shows up and it's like 4 inches across your screen. I mean, it really shows up. You can see the fork of the tail. It's not like just little dots of like bait fish. I mean, we'll mark mullet or we'll mark other things that are much smaller and they're just kind of dots and you see them moving and everything. But the tarpon, I mean, you see, like if it hits it just perfectly, it actually looks like a photograph almost. And you can see, just to your point, like, okay, now the bait is getting over there or the lure's coming over or the fly is getting close to these fish. And in some cases, you can see them just part like and go away. And to your point, it's like, okay, before we were just seeing a snapshot of what was there and you could see this big bunch of fish and then you drop a bait down into them. You're like, how are we not getting bit? I don't understand how we're not getting bit. We're just dropped it into an inferno of fish underneath. But now we can see that when the bait dropped in, the fish parted and they don't want anything to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And like to your point of saying these fish aren't doing anything, let's leave. We've gotten to the point to where we can say, okay, well, they obviously are seeing something. They see the leader, they're seeing something. They just don't want a bait in the water with them. Something is going on with these fish. And it seems as though we're wasting our time. Like it's hard to say that. Before you would say that and you're like, oh, you're a pessimist or, just give it a little time and it'll happen. But when you see it, that's the big difference to me about the new evolution of this electronics is that you can see it in action. Like if you drop something down and you see a fish rush over to it and then stop and then rush back, well, you're kind of on the right track. Like something got his attention and made him run over there, but then something also made him stop and not bite it, 5 feet from it or 2 feet from it or whatever, whatever you can discern from the sonar. And that's what I think is really changing things. And certainly the bass fishermen and you guys up there in the Great Lakes that are using this on a daily basis, you're way ahead of where we are. And we're just learning, what the potential of this technology is, but it's pretty impressive. And to be able to say, like you're saying, that it doesn't make them bite. No, it's not going to make them bite. But in my opinion, if you can eliminate spots that you would have stayed on for an hour trying to get that bite, and now you're looking out there and you're like, well, these fish aren't even moving for this thing. They're not even moving. And if they are moving, they're moving in the opposite direction, right? You would have no idea just looking at a standard sonar screen. You would have, you look and they're there and you look again and they're there and you're just getting a snapshot versus like a video of what's going on in front of you. And I don't know. I just think it's definitely going to change a lot of what we do, and we're going to get better and better and better at using it, and it's going to get further away. We're going to be able to use it as effectively further away as we are, close up. That's what I think is going to happen in the future. It's just going to get better and better and better, and then you'll look out there and you're like, wow, 1,000 feet out there, there's a fish.
Oh my God. I just see all this technology. As soon as you buy something, it's already obsolete on my floor here, right?
Yeah.
Because they already thought about it. But hey, can you see live bait?
Oh yeah.
So I don't fish bait. So you can see the bait moving?
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Okay. It's
Yes,
like if you're fishing a
especially
big pinfish or
Yeah.
something, you can see it moving.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that moving, and the bass fishermen are seeing little tiny lures moving. Like they throw out there, and they're watching their lure come back, and they're watching a bass go and eat it. So, but for our purposes, absolutely. And in fact, when we caught that muskie just recently, we were using this technology, and we were using a big skipjack herring was the bait, and you could absolutely see it. It's like that's the bait, and then you would see a fish come up underneath it and then turn off and not eat it. And so it's like, man, like that's one of the situations that I'm kind of thinking about is like, when do you say we need to move? Well, when you're seeing fish rush up to the bait and then turn off, it's like sooner or later one of them's going to eat it because they're coming up to it. Like, and so like in that situation, we kind of stuck it out for a little while, and we did not see the one that actually ate it on the sonar because it wasn't pointed in that direction. We were kind of scanning out for other ones, but we saw enough of fish kind of moving over towards the bait to where we were thinking, well, I think we're going to get a bite here because they are moving towards the bait. Now, this was on a day that we were supposed to be catching stripers, and they were not biting at all. We didn't get a single bite. Now we got a lot of fish would come up on the bait, but they wouldn't eat it. They just were not eating it for whatever reason. So it was looking like a blank. And because of the sonar, we're seeing that these muskies are coming up to the bait, but they're just not committing yet. And it made us stick it out another hour in that spot. And then we ended up getting one, which I'm not sure we would have if we hadn't had the electronics. And it was just kind of like, using it in a slightly different way, or at least in my mind, I'm using it in a slightly different way a lot of times of knowing when to leave rather than I found them, like I already knew they were going to be there. It's a bridge, and that's where the tarpon live, right? I mean, they're going to be there at a certain time of the year. If they weren't there, something would be really wrong. And so you can go down this bridge, and certainly you can see where some are, stacked in a little thicker than others, and that might be a good place to fish it. But as you see the bait going back there, and you see the fish around it, and the way that they're reacting, that tells you a lot. And so, yes, to your point, you can absolutely see the bait. We can see the bait. We're using it for bait. Not only can we see a pinfish or a mullet on a hook, but we're also in muddy water. We're scanning around and being able to see where the, mullet, they'll make kind of a mullet mud. They'll eat on the bottom, and the water will become kind of milky, like literally like white. And that you're in the presence of a ton of mullet. But are they over there feeding actively, or are they behind you, or where? And you're kind of watching for fish to jump out of the water, and then you throw the cast net as fast as you can. But now with this technology, you scan around and you're like, oh, they're right there. And you throw the cast net there and you fill up, where it's pretty impressive. I mean, it's like putting on a pair of polarized sunglasses, and all of a sudden you can now see into the water where before you couldn't. And everybody else around you is like, there's a fish right there. And you're like, where? I don't see one. Right now with this stuff, it's like, oh yeah, they're right there. And if we had thrown right there, we would have missed them because now they're moving this way. And so now you have to lead them a little bit with the cast net and throw. I mean, it's gotten that good with those things. But I mean, what we're doing with it is kind of elementary compared to like what the pro bass fishermen are doing. They're really using that stuff to the best possible, way that they can. Yeah,
right. It's a huge advantage now, Do you ever do so you got the bait, say over the bobber, bait over the sides. Were you throwing artificial lures to get the fish fired up, and then just when they came in on the lure to get like the, hide and seek, they saw the bait?
Yeah.
Or no?
No, we'll certainly do that. Okay. We'll certainly do that in saltwater for different species. And oftentimes it'll be the other way around, where we'll actually chum, live chum with pilchards or any sort of fish, but pilchards are the ones that we like the most. Get a whole well full of pilchards, and they're like a little 4-inch fish, 5-inch fish, and you're throwing those out and that gets them all fired up. And then you throw the fly in there as they're
Okay.
like for tuna or something that might be sitting at 200 feet, you can bring them right up to the surface, and then you can throw a fly. And so all of a sudden you can make fish that are pretty inaccessible to the fly angler. You can bring them right up to the surface and make them, prime target. Right.
Okay.
And so, like you were saying, like, certainly no one today is on the frontier of that. People like Ralph Delph and Robert Trossett and all of those guys, they pioneered that fishing, and they would go out to these places where they would mark on their screens, schools of fish way down there, a couple of handfuls of pilchards, and they come right to the surface. It's really cool. But in this situation with the muskie, everything was so slow that particular day that nothing was biting anything. And so we just had baits out, and they were, we wouldn't have even known. The skipjack is a very powerful bait, and it does move around a lot. And so it does a lot of the work for you.
Okay.
It will pull every bit as hard as a mullet, if not even harder. I mean, it is one of the hardiest baits around, and it will go, 40 yards in that direction, and you can kind of pull on it, and it'll go down 40 yards over here, and then it'll go 40 yards over here. And so now this bait has now covered, all this huge area. And, I think what my friend that we fish with, Melton Hill Bill, he says, that all the fish hate the skipjack. They don't like them. And so they'll eat them for food, but they also just kill them. They don't like them around. And so they will take a swipe at them and kill them, both the muskie and the striper, in that situation. So, and both those fish, the muskie and the striper, are large targets that mark well on the sonar. So I think he's learning a lot about it and using it very effectively as well. But it sounds like you are too.
Trying, I think, how do you get those, how they're not like negative, they're like neutral static fish. Mm-hmm. It's like you had tough day and stripers, you just change your game plan. Well, so like, how do you adjust like a normal angler? That's the key thing, is like, okay, we got a really bad day going here. How do we like pull this rabbit out of our hat? Right. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think this is where that technology will help. And then just learning as you learn, it's like, oh, we're going to just go for this technique right here. And sometimes you stumble across stuff like probably never would have did that. So like we do some, like the bass guys, you ever hear the long line cranking?
I don't know if I know what that is. What is that?
So basically you're not allowed to troll with a crankbait, in a tournament or something. So you make a long cast, you unengage the reel, and then you use the trolling motor to pull away.
Oh, okay.
So now you're going to crank it in, say, 100 feet, but it gets the depth you want. Well, right. So that's sort of what I've been doing a little bit with my fly anglers that say, hey, they're okay anglers, but they're more trout than they are like predator fish anglers. So I'll get them to get it out there. And before I have them engage, I'm going to move, 40 yards, 30 yards away, and then I'll have them engage to strip in that way. Mm-hmm. And I can play that game there that way. And we just cover the distance and get the depth needed and adjust it to their skill set. So that's sort of how I've overcome those tough days, when I think the biggest thing as a fishing guide is when the skill set and expectations don't align, right, Tom?
Very good. That should be a T-shirt.
Go for it.
That should be a T-shirt. Well, my next question was just about that. Like, you've been at this guiding, profession for a long time, and it's one thing to, in your mind, to come up with these different techniques and different things that you can do. But how do you, this is just kind of between two guides here. How do you keep someone engaged when you're having a tough day? And how do you pull that rabbit out of the hat and keep the spirits high? And do you have any tricks that you do when you're having a bad day, and how you kind of turn that into a good day and keep people, engaged and willing to try some new things? And if you do, maybe, all of a sudden, maybe you can catch a couple fish that make the day.
Right. I think the first thing of the fly rodder is that fatigue sets in. And if they're not a purist, I'm going to ask them to pick up a conventional rod and reel. Because we know we have bite windows, right? Mm-hmm. Like if they're pulling water, or the water's going to start moving on us, or we got a little wind coming, I don't want them to be fatigued. I want them to be on their A game when it's time. So I'll offer that up to them. I'll say, hey, let's just have some food. Let's just go drag some lines, troll up, catch a few fish, and then just when we're ready, let's re-engage again. I think fatigue is the hardest part to overcome with a fly angler, especially freshwater, because we're not stalking with a few casts and say, there it is, 10 o'clock, go for it. And then you might go 20 minutes, right, without another. Well, we're talking hundreds of casts a day. So I think fatigue is my hardest part to make a successful day. And so if they don't want to engage with conventional gear, then what I'll do is I'll go in the backcountry, give them a break, and I'll get into super skinny waters and sight fish where we can just use floating lines or poppers and catch maybe not our targeted fish, but we'll catch maybe some largemouth. We might catch a few pumpkin seeds or something just to break up that grind, get a few fish under our belt. And then at that point, their morale goes up, and then we'll go back to our targeted species, sort of like you guys do with the striper muskie thing, right? I hate to say it, a fishing guide report card is to catch a fish, and we are entertainers, right? But you can only tell so many stories, right? So I usually try to have plan B before I leave the dock, and C and D. Sometimes I'm down to D.
Yeah, for sure. Right? For sure. Do you have any kind of priorities of when you're going out for a day with clients? It doesn't have to be fly guys or spin guys or any certain client, but just you got a client, probably a new person that you hadn't fished with. Do you have any sort of priorities that you have in your head of how the day is going to go, things that are super important?
I do. First off, as always, I evaluate their skill set. So a lot of times I'll get in some protected water and I'll just see what their spinning rod, casting rod, fly rod skill set is. So I usually have close to the dock, I usually have 3 or 4 good A spots that I'm going to basically qualify their skill set and let me know what we can do. Can they stand on the deck? Do they have to stay inside, off the deck? Once I determine that skill set, then I start turning the volume up on them. And then if I can see that their skill set can handle it, I'm going to start pour the wood right to it. And then when they fall apart, I can always bring back. But I think safety, falling off the boat, all that too. But if I have to, I'll go into protected bay. If I see that it's, hey, all right, we're not the best angler, but we're just going to stay on the lee side of stuff. We're going to get the job done that way. And I do have milk runs, of course, just like you. We have our A spots, B spots, but there's times that we can't get there because of the skill set. So I'm always looking ahead. I have where I really want to fish and where we might have to fish, type situations too. Do they get seasick? Stuff like that. You deal with way more than I do.
Yeah.
Thunderstorms on a daily basis, right? That's what you're dealing with a lot too, is weather. We have wind. The lakes get pretty choppy really quickly with us. And I'm always playing.
It's big water.
I'm not sure I'm not sure what you're playing with. I'm using windy. That's what I usually,
that's the one I use.
Okay. And I'm always looking and I show the client. So I think too, Tom, is you make them part of the being a fishing guide too. Say, hey, look at the depth finder. This is why we're over here. This is the point. Check this out. Right. And you make them feel engaged into what you're doing guiding wise. I think it keeps them engaged a little more too. Be a player in this. Just don't aimlessly cast out and hope to catch a fish, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And then you're walking kind of a fine little funny line that not all fishing guides do. A lot of fishing guides are all fly or don't ever mess with the fly or whatever. And you're kind of in a situation to where you're doing a lot of both, maybe. It seems like more fly, but how do you manage, it could be a delicate situation, to talk to somebody and you get out there and they don't have the skill level to do what they need to do, but the fishing's really good. And if they just picked up the spinning rod, man, anybody could catch them right now. And that's a weird situation. And we do find ourselves in that situation in the saltwater where you got somebody that really wants to, fly fish for tarpon, and they've been doing it now. They've got you booked for a week. Well, it's day 4 and it doesn't look like it's getting any better. And at some point you're kind of would you maybe just want to catch one? Because they're super nervous for one thing. Like they put this thing up on this pedestal and it's making it worse that they haven't caught one and they can barely get it out of the boat. And I've seen it happen before both ways, to where if you just stick with it, they'll catch the fish on fly. But I've seen it also happen to where they've put it up on this pedestal and it's making them so nervous, whether it's a permit, a tarpon, or a bonefish or whatever, but they're so nervous that they can't do the things that they need to do to get the job done. And so you kind of propose it to them in a way that it's like, look, we could catch one on spin. I mean, I'm sure we can. And they do. And then everything turns around because they're like, oh, this wasn't like, I can do this. Like, I know how to do it now. I've seen it happen with a spinning rod. Now I can do it with a fly rod, and everything turns around, right? I've seen it both ways. And I've also seen it where you propose it to somebody and they're horribly insulted that you would even bring that up. I don't know I was just wondering if you have encountered that, or if that's something you encounter on a regular basis, or if you kind of like, where do you have to walk that line sometimes?
Absolutely.
I knew you did.
I usually, so the first thing, if I went with you, I'd say, Tom, I want you to get to the nearest bait shop first, because I'm going to like probably fall apart and I want to catch one of these things. Yeah. That would be my motto. Right. If I could do it with fly rod, great. But sometime I'm going to screw up and you're going to say, Jeff, just get a bait rod out. And I'd say, sure, let's do it. But, so I usually try to clarify that, in advance. And that way, because, my boat's only 22 foot long. So, I got 20 some rods in there. Right. So I try to keep it like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But I will say, you've probably seen it too, is the expectations of a fly angler, because we're not like looking for that targeted tarpon species, like that pedestal fish. We're looking to like improve skill set. It's not as high. So if I get, 4 or 5 smallmouth and lose a few more, maybe get a big drum, a couple shots at a carp that they blew because they threw on top of their head or something, that's a pretty successful day compared to like, hey, we're going to go troll up a limit of walleye and catch, 20 smallmouth on a gear rod. Mm-hmm. So I think their expectations is not as high. I think if you can get them to improve their skill set during the course of the day, works well. And then my number one, if they won't pick up a spinning rod, I'll just use straight running line with a 1/2 ounce egg sinker above a swivel, and then I'll run the same fly off of that. So that, like a Michigan chuck and duck thing. So we're still using a fly reel. We can cut through the wind. I can get to the bottom, and they're still stripping it in. And that's like my medium, like not in salt, but let's make this happen. Yeah. So that's work too. Yeah. I was thinking about what you said about like go to the bait shop. Because I used to have, when I was trying to catch permit on fly, the first few, like one thought is that, look, man, every time you put the fly rod down and you pick up a spinning rod, that's, and if you catch one, that's one that you might have caught on fly. You might have, but you chose to use a spinning rod, right? But then, later I look back on it, I was like, man, I spent way too much time trying to catch them on fly. And had I just caught a few more on spin, eventually I would have caught way more on fly, because I also put the fish up on a pedestal. My knees would knock every time I'd see one. I mean, not that it doesn't happen now. Like, you get nervous, right? But as you get more experience under your belt, whether it's with a spinning rod or a fly rod, you're just getting more permit catching experience, more muskie catching experience, more whatever catching experience. You tend to, that experience does eventually pay off, no matter what kind of tackle you're using, right? So that was always like a question that we always had, among ourselves, was kind of like, do you suggest the spinning rod or do you not? And so, and a lot of people have different opinions, and some are very strong on what you do. Both ways, right? Like, absolutely should catch one on spin immediately and then get that over with. And now you've caught one and you can spend the rest of the week trying to catch one on fly. That's one way. The other way is to go all week and then try to catch one at the end, which I don't agree with. If you're going to go all week, just go all week.
right? Like,
Yeah.
go all in. But I would imagine that you're getting a lot. So when I was looking at your Instagram, I also noticed a bit about the drum. So tell me about the drum in your area, and we'll close it out with that. But it seems like that's a species that doesn't get a lot of respect, and you fish for them maybe in different ways that they're cool, right? So what is it about the drum that you have in your fishery? Are they really available, or what?
Yeah. So the poor little drum is a trash fish. People will throw them on the gunnel. I don't believe
in that term, by the way.
I know, me neither. That's what they call them. They throw them on the gunnels of the boat. They're bycatches. Well, in my book, it's the saving grace of a bad spin fishing day. Yeah. Because they fight like crazy. There's a high density population, shallow or deep. They're every day can save a trip. So with the fly rod, the cool thing about it is people would think that the drum are bottom feeding, because their mouth is not down and it's not up like a predator. It's halfway between, Tom. But the cool thing about it is that until the water gets 78 degrees, these fish are in the top water column. So, and they're in huge schools, and they get up to, 10, 12 pounds, 15 pounds would be the max probably in my area. But a lot of really big females that are pushing that 10, 12 pounds. And they hit chicken feathers. So, you could get 6, 8, 10 in a day or more. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just, and they fight like crazy. So I think that's just one thing that is a saving grace for me, because I can go and say, let's go hunt these. And then meanwhile, let's go chase some bass and some, carp or whatever else too. But I think that's going to be still my go-to. If I took you up here, I think the first thing we'd say is let's go catch some of these drum before we did anything else. Yeah. And you'd be like, that's a cool fish, man.
Right. I mean, what's wrong with that? It's kind of sounds very similar to our Jack Crevalle, right? Like everybody wants a fish that bites something cool and fights really hard. And then you catch too many of them and it's like, we don't want to catch those anymore. I don't know.
Oh
I don't understand it, but they save a day more than anything else. They save a day more than anything else. I would
sign me up for those all day.
Oh, they're fantastic. And I get it. I mean, I get it. They can be too available, but I can also tell you that if you and I got to the dock and you said, you know what, I would really like to catch those Jack Crevalle, we might have a hard time finding them. Like if you just said, that's what I want to do today. Like it's one of those things where, you're tarpon fishing or whatever, and you look over and you're like, damn, look at that big school of Jack Crevalles. And, you could catch a ton of them. But, sometimes when you go out looking for them, they're not, just like anything else. You go looking for it, it's not that easy to find.
Absolutely right, every time.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, you seem like a really awesome guy to spend the day with in a boat, and April definitely didn't steer me wrong. How would people spend a day in the boat with you?
Basically you can just go to Great Lakes Fly Fishing LLC. I have a nice website there. Multiple ways to contact me through the website, through the email, through my phone number, and then we could just discuss options. If you're up, especially family visiting or something like that in the Great Lakes, hit me up. I'd love to get you out in the water, and you too, Tom, of course.
Oh man, I'd love it. I will come up there. I really will come up there. That is one of, I just say it all the time. I'm like, man, of all the parts of the country, I just have never been there. Like, I don't know that area. So I want to know. And I got a couple friends up there and a new friend in you. So we'll make it happen.
Perfect.
All right. Well, good luck to you. And thanks for doing the show. And I hope you'll get some people calling you up and going out there and sending me some pictures and messages of what they catch. I'm sure that it'll be awesome. But thanks, Jeff. And we'll be back with another awesome guest just like Jeff next week. See you.